an intro to voice dialogue. And I'm going to work real hard to get us out of here right at 8:30 and keep to the time that is allotted for this. So voice dialogue is a kind of work that has been enormously supportive to me, and I think can be enormously supportive to a lot of different people. It can really be helpful for moving through unconscious blocks and things that get in the way of the full expression of who we are in the world. And for me, it also helped me move into a place of a greater level of ease in my life, and a sense of being more comfortable in my own skin. It can help you with blocks to creativity, to finding or identifying your vocational path. It can help with relationship blocks, both within a relationship, that could be a work relationship or romantic relationship, as well as finding a romantic relationship or a partnership in whatever form. And it's also really helpful for making major decisions. It can be really good. So what I appreciate about it is it helps you know what you don't know you don't know. And that can be extremely helpful. So the sort of outline for the evening is I'd like to start by telling you my story and how voice dialogue has, or one of the ways that voice dialogue has really helped me. And then I'll kind of move into some of the three sort of basic pillars of what it is and what is used to do the work. And that part will be sort of interactive a little bit. And then lastly, I'm going to do a little sample facilitation. So you'll get to see it in action. And then there'll be some time for questions too. Does that sound all right? All right, great. Good. So for me, since I was a little girl, certainly a teen, but I've longed for, I've had a longing for a partner, for a boyfriend, a husband, someone that I could be really close to emotionally and feel the warmth of romantic love and be really bonded with. And right out of college, I got married, just so I could get that. It didn't actually turn out to, the marriage didn't actually turn out to have the qualities that I was so longing for and hungry for. And a few years later, I left it. But I was still hopeful that I could find this thing I was looking for. And so I would go and seek out people, look for people to fall in love with. And I kept noticing that the people that I fell in love with weren't really available for the kind of love that I was really longing for at all. In fact, I started noticing that I wasn't interested unless they were really unavailable, which was very strange. But I kept seeing it happen. And so I was trying all these things, like I was trying talk therapy to try to get some solution. What is it that's going on here? And that sort of felt like just kind of moving furniture around, but not really necessarily getting at what was going on. I tried journaling a lot, self-analysis, kind of ad nauseum with friends, like going over and over and over every single piece of every relationship, positive affirmations. I tried, willpower, kind of declaring myself worthy of more than what I was getting, so I'm going to break off this relationship and that's it, And either I get back together with the same person, or I find another person who at first seemed really different, and then later not so very different. So finally, at some point, I noticed, I kind of observed that I was obsessing about a man who was 16 years younger than me, and in a committed relationship. And I thought, okay, this is not working. There's something going on here that I'm not able to get at with my conscious mind, and I need some help. So I started looking for a Jungian analyst, because I had a sense of Jung being connected to the unconscious, and I needed a navigator, and I was making nothing. I mean, like $500 a month, plus room and board. So I needed one with a sliding scale. And it took me about 6 months, but I finally found this woman, Eleanor, up in Portland, and she was learning about voice dialogue and started doing that work with me. And then eventually I met my teacher, Jamie Onapanjaya, who lives in Portland as well. And she and I started working together, and she was also teaching me about voice dialogue. But in my work with Jamie, I got to meet both the part of me that was so hungry for a relationship and having that deep, deep longing in whom I had seen throughout my life, but also this other part of me that was really terrified of such a relationship materializing, because that part felt like it would be annihilated if that kind of relationship occurred. So what I'd like to do right now is introduce you briefly to those two parts of me. So I'm just going to step into them and let them kind of speak a little bit of what they are and how they are in me. Okay. Whenever we do this work, you move out of the chair you're in, so you know that you're in this part of you. So I'm going to do that. I'll start with the part of me that really longs for a relationship. I feel a little shy. But I really do like having a boyfriend and having someone that I can be really close to. I like holding hands and going for walks, and I like snuggling and kissing, and it's really fun to sleep next to each other, and you just get to feel like there's somebody there all the time, like they're right there with you, and it feels so warm, and they like me, and I like them, and it's just really great. So that's what I want. I really want that a lot. Okay, shake that one off. And I notice about that self that it's really young. It's a really young part. And it really, what it's looking for is almost a kind of merging, like a kind of union. So that tells me some interesting things. And then I'll introduce you to the other side as well. Yeah, I mean, when this one is running things, which it has been for a lot of Tamara's life, like, there's no room for anything else. I mean, when is she gonna, like, make things or show up in the world? Or when is it just Tamara time? Like, that's what I want. I want to be able to just make decisions about what I want to do, and not think about what he wants or what he's doing or what we're gonna do together. I want sort of space where I can sort of stretch out, breathe, kind of have a sense of what I'm wanting, who I am, and there's none of that available when that one's running the show. None of it. Okay, so I didn't even know I had that part until the voice dialogue. I mean, I was so identified with this one, and it was so vocal and insistent that I didn't really realize this one was even in there. And so what was happening was, since I was identifying with this one, it was like I was hopping on one leg. I had the part of me that likes union and being close in spades, but I didn't have this other part. Well, that's kind of over there, but and so I was attracted to men who had the space part really well. And because I was missing that part. And so I would get together with these men, and we'd sort of hobble along with them really having the spacious, autonomous part, and me really having the connected, close part. But we never really felt met in the parts that we were primary with. So it would blow up. It wouldn't really work. But after I was able to work with these two selves in voice dialogue and get connection with them, then it was like I was walking on two legs. And I could meet someone who knew how to be close and also how to have space and take space and have more autonomy. And for me, that was huge. I mean, it was a life changer, and it really opened something for me. Now, there are still places in my relationship where we're hopping on one leg with each other, you know, but there's also a sense of curiosity about those places, and like, oh, where is the leg for me? How do I find that and stand on my own two legs with that too? So I just can't say enough about voice dialogue, and I really think it really has that power with most everybody who tries it. It's really a non-pathologizing work, so it's not designed for people that are dealing with strong disorders like borderline personality and things like that. It's much more about getting a stronger sense of wholeness and ease within one's life. Any questions so far? Comments? Okay, great. So the next thing we'll do then is we'll talk about the work itself, and those three components that I mentioned of it. So the first pillar of voice dialogue, the first aspect that I'm going to talk about is awareness. And this is a really important piece of the work. It's something that you develop as you're doing the work, and it's something you bring in to accomplish the work. And by awareness, I'm talking about kind of the witness state, this kind of spacious, open place. I think it's in everything, and it's available to us if we can kind of tap into it. And I think of it like the sky in a way. I find the sky as an image of that, because it's always there, sort of, if you give it some consciousness, looking down. It's always perceiving. And there's no judgment in it. It's got a kind of benevolence to it, but it's not syrupy. It's very kind of unattached in a way. And there's absolutely no investment in changing anything. It's just really perceiving what is and welcoming it in a way. Almost, maybe not welcoming it, beholding it might be a better word. So I'm curious if anybody knows what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Some people have a really familiar relationship with this awareness, and some people really don't. What this allows you to do is coming. We'll get to that. So right now what I want to do is just take a minute and kind of drop into that awareness. See if you can call it in. And we'll take just 1 minute and see. And then if anybody wants to share what that was for them or whether they were able to. And if your mind is racing or whatever.
You mean the witness?
The witness, the observer. And if you can try to maybe even perceive any qualities in that awareness state, if you can, while you're in it, if you can get in it. And if you can't, that's also interesting. So let's just take a minute now and drop into that. Anybody want to share anything you noticed?
Yeah, I did. I mean, in that witness state, I told you about, I had this experience earlier where I was walking in the woods and this woman was collecting some things from the ground, so I had some stuff sticking on my backpack, and she was getting angry at me for taking things from the forest. So I was watching myself go through that experience, and then thinking, oh, I'm getting this thing from the outside, like people yelling at me, and I've had this happen a lot in the last year or so. Why is that happening to me? You know, so there's this part like coming in like, and then there's this other part that's trying to get work and thinking about working as cleaning people's houses to make money. And I realized there's a part that's terrified of being in somebody else's control and like being yelled at, so that's what happened to me. Yeah. That's interesting. Mm-hmm.
So when I am in that observer place, I notice the calmness of groundedness, like a curiosity, and as far as the, there's a judgment side, but the observer is watching the judgment as well as the story that's running, that the judgment has judgment about, and me judgment about myself judging the story and the person, and so the witnessing is just over that in this calm place.
Found that for me it was calm and peaceful, but it was also kind of felt like I was kind of Lady Liberty and balancing the scales and weighing them all and weighing all the different pieces and seeing this talking over here and this talking over here and this back here and then hearing them all kind of chatter amongst themselves as well and like, okay. Weighing them all, kind of like, how heavy really are you and what is this about?
Cool. Okay, so that's the first piece. It's really just witnessing, just seeing it. And what I have worked with over my time in voice dialogue is to get more and more connected to the not needing to change anything piece, and to that really be holding something just, oh, there it is. There it is. It's right here. That part of me is running right now, and it's happening. And there's nothing I need to do about it. I just see it. So then the second aspect of voice dialogue that I want to talk about are the selves. And they're kind of the opposite of the awareness thing, in the sense that they have a lot of judgments, depending on which self it is. They see the world in an extremely particular way, and they're absolutely convinced that that's the way the world is. 100%. It's definitely like this. And I use this analogy. The human experience is actually open to any number, an infinite number of selves. It's really any archetypal reality that we can, like the awareness is seeing, is witnessing, and the selves are how we experience life. It's like how we live in the world, we move in the world, and we can do that in an infinite number of ways. Hi. Hi. Welcome. Thank you. And but just for the sake of metaphor, we'll say you get 52 when you're born, just so that we have a finite number we can work with. So you're born into the world, you have 52 options for how you're going to show up in the world. And within the first few months, years, you figure out, oh, you're a girl, so not those. Or you're a boy. And then you find out, you live in the Midwest, so these are out. Or you live in this social class, so these ones are out. And your parents are in this religion, so you're definitely not going to be invoking or utilizing these ones. And some of these you just haven't needed. There's no context for you to use yet, so you don't have any contact with them. They're not like off the table. They're not like disowned, but they're not really conscious. You're not connected to them in any way. And then your mom doesn't like such and such. And you figure that out pretty quickly, so you get rid of these as quickly as you can so that you can make sure she's really on board with who you are. And by the time you're like 4, you're down to 4 or 5, maybe 6 selves. And you think of these selves as I. This is I. And you grow up, and these are the selves you identify with as this is who I am. And it just seems like one thing. It doesn't feel like 5 different selves. So for instance, my mom was, my dad, because he wasn't expecting to have a child, he really went straight into vocation, work mode, make money, you know, be able to support the family thing, and vanished. And so my mom turned to me for her like emotional support. And because of that, I had this urge to be close with her. And I had that close one. I also developed a pleaser, like one who's really tuned in to the needs of other people, especially my mom, and figuring out what she might need at any time so I could be ready for that. For instance, some of the other heavy hitters that we encounter in this culture are the pusher, and that's the one with the to-do list that goes on and on and on and on. And it's always like, no, you have to do this, you have to finish this, you need to do that. There's the perfectionist, that's another big one that a lot of us have carried. The pleaser. There's the vulnerable child. That's a self that most people have somewhere in there.
The what child?
The vulnerable
The
child.
vulnerable child.
Mhm. And that self can take a number of different forms, so the vulnerability might show up in different ways. There's also the playful child, the magical child. So these selves that we carry, these are what is called in voice dialogue primary selves. These are kind of the ones we think of as I before we start moving into consciousness and learning, oh, actually that's this self, that's this archetypal energy in me. These selves, just by virtue of who they are, not because they're bad or problematic or anything, they disown other selves. They say, Mark is not that. Sita is this, she's not that. And those selves we call disowned selves in voice dialogue. And the ways you can find out where your disowned selves are is in the people you judge. That's one of the places. Because those, when you have that judgment come up and that like, ew, that's awful, I can't stand that. That's actually the primary self speaking. It's the self in you that's saying, I don't like that. It's not actually you. You can actually separate from that primary self and say, oh, this part of me doesn't like that. But I actually have some aspect of that within me, and I can connect with it, and it has value to me. So your enemies, I say loosely, but the people that really drive you crazy can actually become your greatest teachers. Paradoxically, the other place we see these selves, the disowned selves, is in the people we fall in love with. So at the beginning, you fall in love with someone who's carrying your disowned self, and it's this family reunion feeling, you know, it's like, oh my gosh, this lost piece of me, here you are, you complete me, you know, and we can hop together onto 2 legs. But unfortunately, what happens is the primary self sort of steps back while the endorphins are running. And then once you kind of get into it and the honeymoon's over, the primary self reasserts itself and it says, oh no, actually we hate that. Don't you remember? That's awful. And the very things you fell in love with become completely irritating to you. This has happened to me many times. So what I was hoping we might do is kind of pair up and have folks just name with your dyad a primary self that you're conscious of having, or like a part of you that you can identify that you've been connected to for a really long time. And then also, if there's anything that you can kind of sense that's sort of like off limits, but that you have some curiosity around or some desire to be more connected to, like a disowned self, what that might look like in you. Does that make sense? Do you feel okay about that? Okay. So, David, do you want to pair with Mark? Is that okay?
Yeah.
Mark's here in purple.
Yeah.
And then you two,
That's Mark.
is it okay?
Hi.
Okay, great.
My name's Ren.
Me.
Ren?
I'm David.
I'm Mark.
Nice to meet you.
My brother's name.
My brother's name David.
What is self you can identify?
One of my brothers.
And are you gonna keep time?
I am.
Okay.
Disowned self that came
You wanna
up
go?
with
Sure.
someone who's really unread.
So there's
Uh-huh.
a part of me that has longed to be a teacher, to step out in public and to share my
I mean, I'm not.
My heart?
Mhm.
and for decades I've been really terrified of being in groups, speaking
Yeah.
in groups.
Super messy. She's not grounded and.
There was decades where I told myself that I was a loner.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Further disowned self, I'm a
There
little.
was decades of my life where I was in agriculture
I
and
mean, I
I
guess I know what it
did
owns.
things by myself. And I didn't want to be anybody's teamwork.
But I know about the,
So reclaiming that piece the last 5-10 years of my life has been really challenging work.
Mhm. Mhm.
yeah, I have a perfectionist for sure. Yeah.
Just getting in touch with the fear of being
It is
judged
nice.
and shamed
It's really
by
critical.
others.
It's really critical
And
and kind of like stubborn.
I've been able to witness myself being critiquing other instructors and teachers and or people in the group that ask questions and dare to show themselves. And for a long time, that's part of me that longed to be able to do that and judged others for not doing it perfectly enough.
Right. Got it.
Feel like, right now I'm trying to get back into doing artwork, so.
So that was the,
I've started something, but
yeah. Cool. Sure.
it's something I don't know much about. I'm confident,
Good.
but,
Thank you.
some
All right, let's see.
ancient Indian symbols.
So,
It's very
yeah,
mathematical.
let's see what's
Yeah.
up in the moment is,
Yeah.
I already know I have a self that's very careful that makes sure
Yeah.
that
Do you go
everything's safe, you know, keeping safe, definitely. And then
Okay.
there's also a self that longs to
Yeah, I find it
express itself without editing. So
it's
just kind of
high,
come from the belly and the heart
like,
and
and so I'm reading
just
about it.
kind of
Yeah.
just like let the chips
Yeah.
fall where they may, that kind of thing.
Mhm.
And I definitely feel the tension between those two. And I would say as far as like the process, the more careful and certainly more primary self, that's on there, is in charge more, like, and it's like, it's very familiar self.
We do about 30 more seconds.
You know, I have one of my kind of strong suits in my intelligence and my analytical ability, so that's very well suited for making sure everything is reasonable, to keep things reasonable, kind of thing. But this other part of me isn't into reasonable, you know, upbeat, you know, that kind of thing.
I
So
picked too many
feel that.
like,
Still working with it.
yeah, but then I stopped.
Yeah.
Moving forward,
I wanted to ask some question about the rewards of
Yeah,
over the decades.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, ongoing process for sure.
All right.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So just open, we don't have time for everybody to share, but if anybody has anything that came up that was really interesting for them, that they feel like sharing, it'd be great to hear. Yeah.
It's interesting that between him and I, it was really similar in that there's this like teenage self that is really coming up a lot recently, and this like craving adventure and not wanting responsibilities and not wanting to be an adult at the same time, wanting all the freedoms and all that. Oh, I get to go out and do all these things. And then disowned self is more of like a quote unquote hippie idea, where it's like, the opposite of organized religion and the opposite of traditional and like more of like the sort of pagan kind of stuff, quote unquote, and like doing things naturally like with herbs and things like that. So that was interesting that we were very, very similar in that way.
Thank you. Thank you. Anyone else want to share? Okay, that's good. We'll talk about the third thing. Well, actually, briefly, I just wanted to say one more thing about the selves is, so there's primary and disowned, and then within each self system, there's a power side and vulnerable side. So every self that you encounter is protecting some kind of vulnerability. So the power self is out there doing things and making it happen. And the vulnerable self is who feels either safe or not so safe if the power self isn't successful, isn't managing to protect that vulnerability. So just to go back to the example here that I was showing you, with the self that really wants to be close, the vulnerability is feeling alone, feeling isolated, feeling unseen, not having touch or that kind of positive love. So that vulnerability I've been very conscious of throughout my life. And like, okay, that's coming up right now. I better find somebody quick. So I've been over-identified, let's say identified, not over, I'll say, with the power side of that, that's really actively trying to address that vulnerability. Over here, on the other hand, this disowned self that I wasn't really even conscious of, that was more autonomous, it's protecting a different kind of vulnerability. A vulnerability around freedom and autonomy and movement in the world. And I didn't even know that I had a vulnerability in that area. So it wasn't being protected for all these years, And now that I have this capacity to feel into both sides, there's the opportunity to stay connected to both. And that brings us to the third element of voice dialogue, which is called the aware ego process. And this is something that the Stones have come into. The Stones are the people who created this work. Hal and Sidra Stone are their names. She used to go by Winkleman, but this is their first book, Embracing Ourselves. And this aware ego process holds the tension between opposites. So you develop an aware ego process. It's really actually the goal of voice dialogue, is to develop this aware ego process. And what it does is it draws from the awareness that what the seeing in that kind of spacious way, and it also draws on the information that the selves are giving and reporting and sharing, and their experiences in the world. And with that information, it holds